everyone, and welcome to the China EVs More podcast, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners and viewers, welcome back. We ask that you help us get the word out about this podcast. I've been told by several people that it's one of the best or the best podcasts that's focusing on the Chinese EV and mobility sector. So let's help us get the word out about this to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sinomoto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinomotoinsights.substack.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, at least in Michigan, it's a freezing too. I don't know about Mass, but can you please introduce yourself?
A freeze and snowstorm confronting imminent.
Oh my God,
This
it is
your
nasty out
co-host,
there.
Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode 235. Yeah, so there's a huge storm brewing, supposed to get 15 inches of snow. Before that, a deep freeze, so like almost minus 20 Celsius. It's pretty cold.
It feels like minus 12 right now in Michigan.
Which is kind of interesting because January for the Chinese EV market is kind of a freeze, right? I think there's been some numbers. I think CPCA said they project that January passenger NEV retail sales is not going to get out of 1 million units. So I think we expected that. I don't, draw anything from that. That was expected from last year. It was the consensus. So we'll see how it goes as we go past the Chinese New Year, which is late this year. And I have to look at the Q1, but a lot of Robotaxi news, I'd say, from the last day, both China and the US. So we can start there. There's more news about this Canadian China EV play. Who's going to come in first?
Let's start with AV news.
So who else but Tesla is again in the news? And there's so many, like the both sides of the debate is interesting to see. Oh wow, I tweeted, is it a half GPT moment, chat GPT moment, or is it a GPT moment at all? When a couple of their vehicles in Austin took away the safety drivers, and then there's monitors behind them in different Model Ys. And at the same time, they took away autopilot in the configurator, I think, which has riled up some of the proponents. And with FSD into the subscription mode starting February 14th. So lots of things going on. And China, DiDi just launched their R2 Robotaxi with Ion. It's a joint venture collaborated. And then Waymo expanded to Miami officially, right? It's live. So all of this is going on. And Elon was talking over at the World Economic Forum.
Well, he also said that FSD could be approved next month in China and Europe.
Europe and China, yeah. Hopefully. He said hopefully.
I think that's his way of trying to put pressure.
Yeah.
On the regions, on the countries. But, I should also congratulate my friend Alex Roy, who did
I forgot
Cannonball Run. He did a Cannonball Run, I think with a Vietnamese guy and from California. What was the guy's name? Matt Goss?
I forget. But
yeah.
it was like 3
anyway,
people,
so he did California to Florida. The Cannonball Run is technically New York to LA or LA to New York, one or the other. So, and another famous Cannonball Run alum is Rich Rawlings, who did that show Fast and Loud. So the Cannonball Run is famous, infamous, and Alex did it, I think, earlier this week or last week in a Tesla with the latest software, zero intervention. So congratulations to Alex and those guys. That's for Tesla to be able to have that feather in their cap is pretty significant. Now, I don't think you and I have ever poo-pooed FSD's capabilities. I'm more concerned about the regulations around it and the people that are using it irresponsibly. That's my concern. The automakers seem to be much more careful about it in incrementally increasing their own version's capabilities. In GM's case, it's Super Cruise, and Ford, it's Blue Cruise. But we get to that point in 2028 where it seems like more than one, including we're talking about the Chinese, maybe this year, later this year, launching level 3 in certain geofenced areas and use cases. So not only intelligent driving is pushing forward, but you'd mentioned earlier the robotaxi stuff. So that's called progress, folks, and it's not just in China but also in the United States.
Yeah, and I think it's fair that I think to this point, Tesla FSD remains the gold standard. I'd say for every Tesla FSD wannabes in China, XPengs, Neos, Huawei's, I think they see that as XPeng, right? He Xiaofeng himself, he made a bet. Where the ChatGPT moment happens, probably not them taking away, theoretically, taking away the safety drivers, but really if water flowing from the faucet, you have a vehicle with FSD, you put it on that network and it drives itself. When are we going to see that? Hopefully in the coming years. But I think so. I think this is year. I mean, after CES, I think this year is we are seeing a lot of scaling, whether it be the Waymos or whether it be the Teslas, whether it's the true robotaxis or the fake robotaxis. I think we're seeing that happening more and more. That's the my kind of yeah.
What's really important is kind of thinking this through several different lenses. I'll just look at it and explain it through three buckets. There's the technology bucket. Does the stack, the current silicon, the current, compute in the vehicle, the edge computing, and then the communication between the cloud and the vehicle, is that fast enough to make all these decisions so that we can have a true level 4? That seems to be the case. The technology is available. Tesla is poking everybody in the eye and saying, you know what? We only need cameras to do it. Okay. And then the next part is the actual regulatory environment or the policy environment. And China seems to be leading the way on that, as Chinese EV companies are talking about level 3 this year. And that couldn't happen without regulators approving that. Now, the third bucket is going to be the actual effects it has on the industry, on the sector. We know in China, there are a lot of taxi cab drivers. Okay. And so, how does this affect their number of rides that they're giving every day? Because let's assume that there's a pretty strong lobby. There is in the United States, anyways, for taxi drivers in California and New York and things like that. So, there's also that if we displace jobs and employment, what happens? Because the government needs to take into consideration that as well. So we should be looking at it through at least these three lenses. And then the fourth is then how cheap can things get? Because you had mentioned scale just now, Lei. We scale by making things much cheaper. So one of the factors anyways, but that's kind of how I would frame it.
Well, in terms of scaling, so we've seen two recent announcements: the Mobileye versus Volkswagen MOIA. They want to put 100,000 robo-vans by 2033. Geely, they just announced their 2030 strategy, where the Caocao Mobility, they want to put 100,000 robotaxis already. We're not even talking about the ponies, the Baidu's, the WeRide. And we heard about DiDi this morning.
Waymo
The
has their own
numbers are
robo-van.
ballooning. So then goes back to your point about replacing, the human drivers. What's going to happen, right? That's a huge issue outside of the tech itself. I think the tech is the simple part, right? So it's the policy, whether it's supportive, and then really the societal ramifications. I think that's still being played out, but at least I think in China, the encouragement, the support for the EVs has been there all along.
Well, and that's the other part, because when we talk about robotaxis, I think many people assume that they're electric or clean energy, but that doesn't need to be the case. And, Waymo is still using the iPace, but most of their vehicles are going to be clean energy, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Again, I should be going to London sometime this year, and if possible, I'd
They sh-
love to try the
yeah,
Baidu, the Wave,
Baidu,
and the Waymo all out in the city of
yeah,
London.
Baidu is working with both Lyft and Uber in London, I believe.
Mhm.
If
Yep.
I'm mistaken. So that's interesting.
There's a subsidiary of Lyft called FlexDrive, and
Yeah,
I'd spoken with the CEO of FlexDrive, John Parks, and they are looking to partner with any and every robotaxi
and
provider.
yeah, and I don't know if you watched there was a section on whether EVs will dominate at the World Economic Forum, where Stella Lee was conversing with Michigan Governor Whitmer. And the number one thing they talked about was policy support, where China has been stable and the Western world, so US, Europe, has been fluctuating. It was one of the primary issues that were talked about in that conversation.
Well, this is where I need to I need to watch that. I have not watched it. There is a policy conference next Tuesday, um, that that'll probably bring that up a little bit. Governor Whitmer, she's almost lame duck status because she
Yeah,
only has a year left,
yeah,
but she's going to these things because I think she has aspirations for higher office. And so to get that picture of we call her Gretch in Michigan, of Gretch and Stella would be I would make that already a candidate for picture of the year,
yeah,
photo of the year,
yeah.
because I spent time this week talking to the Toronto bureau chief for automotive news about the whole Canada thing. We can circle back and talk about that a little bit, but you'd also wanted to talk about, and when should we bring up the whole awards thing?
I think we'll have it finalized probably for next episode. I mean, we already have
Next
most of
episode,
the,
okay.
yeah, awards
We've had
done.
most of the
Yeah,
yeah.
we yeah, so we'll probably talk about that next episode. But yeah, Canada thing is a thing. Also, speaking of policy support, Germany came back with EV subsidies. The
3
way,
billion euro, so three and a
yeah,
half
it's
billion
very
dollars.
interesting. If you don't have kids in the house, you don't get as right. I think the setup was very interesting. It was tiered, capped at how much you make. I think it was like 80,000 euros, but with two children.
And includes Chinese cars.
Yes. At the same time, the minimum pricing decision is still to be made on the Chinese EV imports. So these are very conflicting. And at the same, you talk about London, UK. Stella mentioned it of UK having that pay per mile fee for EVs, and she kind of alluded in saying that's kind of stupid, right?
Well, the fact of the matter is, though, Lay, some places, some cities, some states, they charge a tax fee for gas, okay? And the the cities and states that adopt EVs pretty quickly, there's going to be a big hole in their budget because of the lack of revenue that they're going to generate due to less people using and purchasing gasoline. These are kind of fringe issues, not fringe issues, but they will become more and more highlighted, as at least in the United States, for Western folks as we see more EV adoption. But pointing back to the benchmark minerals numbers, the year end numbers, about 20% of all vehicles sold last year were clean energy vehicles. China driving a lot of that, but Europe also playing a decent role. in that 20%. So Europe is clearly leading the United States on this issue, and they seem to be much more serious about the net zero, the carbon neutral goal for 2035. Now they're going to push it out. They're not going to hit the 2035 goal, but you know, um, we got to get there. And I don't know how we're going to get there, but so one thing I did want to ask, and we've talked about this a lot over the last several episodes, probably the last year. Now, I had a huge rant in the newsletter this week, long post about Porsche and all its troubles. They're at 42,000 units, under 300,000 units total for the year. The United States was up single digits percentage wise. Europe was down like 15%. The best days for Porsche overlay, and let's broaden this out. We talked about this a little bit as well, but let's just be very direct on this conversation. Is Merc, BMW, Audi, are their best days kind of over? Because you and I believe premium is redefined in China, and it doesn't currently include those companies. So what are your thoughts? How do they get back to being the kind of example of premium in the automotive space?
Well, the answer is definitely yes of Porsche. Relatively for the ABBs, from what I'm hearing, their internal projections are all under 500,000 for 2026. So Porsche, they're actually reducing further the network from previously planned 100 down to 80. Okay, so I mean, how do you support a volume 40,000 units, right? And in order to maximize profitability, if you still have that. But definitely what all of them are doing is having China as the local R&D center where, I mean, Beamer, they put a press release on the locally produced iX3. Look at the number of Chinese companies they mention in that press, right? Uh, that's a, what do you call it? That's a mandatory, right? That you have to have the Chinese inside in order to even have a chance. I mean, yeah. I mean, to answer your question, yes, the best days are over.
Globally, not just in China.
Yeah. It's no longer because of the Chinese redefining premium or luxury. I think nowadays when you look at a Audi, when you look at a Beamer, when you look at a Mercedes, it doesn't have the luxury connotation as before because we look at it with a different lens.
So this week's newsletter, part of my deep dive was looking at the Macan versus the U7 launch. The Macan launched in Q4 of 24. U7 launched, the Xiaomi U7 launched middle of
Last
2025. Yeah, and if we're using 7 RMB as a FX rate, the Macan EV launched at over $100,000 effectively. The range was around 220 miles, so very, very, very low. The U7 had many more features, and it launched at 250,000 RMB.
I think the cheapest Macan in the Chinese market was right around 600,000 RMB.
Yeah, 600,000 RMB.
Yeah, so $80,000 roughly, a
Yeah.
little bit more than $80,000. Yeah, it's at least twice as much as the U7.
The U7, Xiaomi sold well over 400,000 units. The U7's probably, 1.3, 1.4 to 1 ratio on U7 to SU7 sales for Xiaomi. So the Macan EV, they had years to develop it, 3, 4, 5 years. Xiaomi's automotive vision has been in existence for 4 years, and they've launched 2 vehicles in that time frame.
So
and Porsche
close to
has
5
not.
years since 2021 announcement. Yeah. So yeah.
So, so that's what they're up against. Bringing all that up to say that a Chinese company can stand up a brand new division Now, maybe they were working on things behind the scenes before they formally announced that they have an automotive division. So let's say a little more than 4 or 5 years. But they have two vehicles that sell well over 400,000 units each, likely more than 500,000 this year. Porsche can't even sell 40,000. Okay, so it's really, really, you look at that and you think about how are they going to compete when a fully featured vehicle that I would argue, at least I haven't driven the U7 for but I would argue when I sat in it, the fit and finish was almost as good as the.
One likely outcome is, can Porsche utilize China's local R&D capabilities for their global markets? Maybe they have to, because Renault is doing that already. They have the Twingo EV developed in China in under 21 months. They have another model coming with China right at the center of R&D. They want to do it in 16 months. Renault, the CEO of Renault was in China recently. I think just this past week visiting, where you don't really produce that much in China, but you still utilize China as an R&D pillar. It's one way that has played out for the foreign automakers that don't produce in China. I think which is working for Renault. And that still signifies the importance of China in their global strategy, right? Porsche may be going that way as well. If to the day where they only import limited number of ultra niche products,
911s,
yeah,
Panameras.
they're probably going to end up like that, but still utilizing the China R&D for features for the rest of the world.
So we agree that it's very realistic that Porsche could build in the United States and in China.
Yeah.
The other thing that I will actually look at this a little bit differently, because Renault is a mass market brand. Part of Porsche's appeal is the racing heritage, the brand. That's where you get the premium from.
Yeah.
Chinese customers aren't willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money anymore for that type of premium. And a simple e-motor developed by NIO can now match anything from a performance standpoint that Porsche rolls out. And the fact of the matter is that in China, 50% of their sales goes to women. So this is what is super, super interesting in how they react and respond with their marketing moving forward. Because if the leadership at Porsche in China aren't recognizing that women, so let's just say this: Macan and Cayenne are 50% of their sales, more than 50% of their sales, and more than half of those sales go to women. So if you're not marketing to women in the United States, it's still very male, masculine advertising. Nothing's really changed. You can't do that in China and expect to gain any of those sales back. So, but if they go too heavy into the women advertising, they might alienate the other markets. So it's a fine line.
And the wider Volkswagen group, right? If you think about the Volkswagen brand, if you think about the 4-letter Audi and the 4-ring Audi, plus Porsche, they're actually competing. And I'm saying this because if you look at the ID.ERA 9X, when that thing comes out, the value for money for that thing compared to an Audi E5 Sportback, right? That's an issue that I have to contend. Because the ID.ERA 9X looks pretty sweet. The only thing left to do is price it right. Otherwise, it's going to be, can it go to the route of an ES8 or is it going to be bust? I think that's going to largely contingent upon the pricing.
And we should point back.
They don't have too much work room to work with on the pricing, because normally in a less competitive world, they could deal with that. But imagine that.
Since you brought up the ES8, look how long it took them to kind of figure out pricing strategy for that thing.
Yeah.
NIO, they couldn't look at ES8 pricing in a vacuum because it would cascade down to its other products, because if they price the ES8 aggressively, the ES6 and ES7 can't be within 10,000, 20,000 RMB because it would be cannibalized. Those products would be cannibalized. So when you aggressively price your halo product or your biggest product, then you have to kind of reconcile the rest of your product strategy. And Volkswagen will have to do that, especially if the ID.ERA is priced to where we think it's going to be priced, which is sub 250, 300,000 RMB.
Yeah. That's it cannot be over 300,000 RMB. It cannot.
Cannot.
If it's
It cannot.
priced over 300,000, it's done. Yeah. So
and then Volkswagen Group, I heard there was rumors that Rivian and Volkswagen Group were having problems with their relationship. And if Rivian can't reconcile that and figure things out between the two of them and they end up blowing up that partnership, Rivian's going to be in a lot of trouble, it seems. So what else?
And then the BMW iX3, the locally produced, interesting, they want to export that to the Southeast Asian markets, including India, right? The long wheelbase, which is, how do you price that one? Remember the first one that came out, they dropped by $10,000 upon launch. That
within
was
30
4 years
days, I
ago,
think,
5
3
years ago,
weeks,
yeah.
wasn't it? So, but this points back to my contention that the glory days, at least the high margin, profit margin glory days for the ABB and Porsche are over. And they'll always be in the China market because it's a 30 million unit market and they can't get that bang for their buck anywhere else in the world. But the one thing that I also pointed out is that let's say you have 35% margins on your products. So you operate that way. Okay. Now your margins get squeezed to 10%, 7%. So you have to squeeze out efficiencies in places to push that to that level. And, all these things that Porsche employees get, these benefits, all these things that the marketing spend, you can't look at it the same way because you don't have those 35% margins to fall back on. So can a company like Porsche, BMW, Mercedes, who are used to just booking bales of cash every quarter, generally speaking, can they work on a shoestring budget and still be effective as a premium automaker? I think that'll be very telling. How do they do that? Because again, I don't see a lot of new management from these companies. So current management are going to have to be able to reinvent these companies in order to be more efficient, less focused on the Western markets like the US and Europe. And then to your point, moving into Southeast Asia, moving into South Asia, which tastes are different, use cases are different, average sales price for vehicles is different. So a lot of things that they need to take a look at as they pivot more towards Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia.
The bind is not only the losing that pricing premium capability, but also when they talk about China's speed, it's not really the true China speed that's been operated on. But I think that's the bind that you have, right? The ID.ERA 9X. How fast do you iterate that into the 2027 version, 28 version? It's, yeah. So
And I'm going to be honest with you, the European and US market will probably get whiplash if they iterate as fast as they should in China, in the West. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it would confuse consumers.
Yeah.
So they have to operate like they're running a middle distance race in Europe and the United States while they're sprinting in China. And we know that up until this point, they haven't been able to sprint. They needed steroids in the name of XPeng and Leap Motor. Okay. Mercedes, they have smaller partnerships, but they have not made a huge commitment to any Chinese EV maker yet. And I haven't heard anything. Have you heard anything about
No,
dancing with
not yet.
anyone? Yeah, me
No,
neither. I have
not
not.
yet. Yeah.
So, hey, what are your thoughts on a random thing? I was talking to one of my friends who happens to work at GM. What do you think of the Chinese F1 driver that they hired? Do you know anything about him? I don't know.
Oh, I mean, he's
Yeah.
popular among the fans, right? The only Chinese driver in F1. So I think it'll be a nice plus in terms of brand. But I mean,
You know,
Cadillac is
I got to say I'm pleasantly surprised about Cadillac's aggressiveness and how they're not like shrinking. They're trying
yeah,
to make way in the China market because they can do that because they feel like they've bottomed out. And I think that's really important. I was told that a Cadillac with Momenta technology is going to be launching very soon as well in the China market. So that, to your point about Chinese partners, every foreign automaker in China is highlighting their partnerships with the Chinese partners. So I think that's really important distinction that we haven't seen before.
yeah. GM in China are still pretty. I mean, more than half are Wuling Baojings, and then Buick's actually getting better because the recent launches of the electric sub-brands.
You know
GLA has
the
been strong. One of the right, like you know, why the reason why I talk about one of the awards is GLA is actually remaining to be the OG. I think they're still the number one MPV if you combine all powertrain. So
one thing that GM did announce is that they're moving Buick Envision
finally,
manufacturing from China away from China. It's
kissing up.
well,
Program
it's
+1
so
610
it's so hard to freaking tell where the administration is going. You know, the Detroit Auto Show last week or 2 weeks ago or last week, I think they didn't articulate it directly, but like the uncertainty is crippling to the tier ones and the OEMs, but they need to continue to do business. And so, one of the things that I asked David Kennedy, the automotive news guy, the Toronto bureau chief, was, does he see Canada becoming a hotbed for battery manufacturing in whether or not Carney thinks or his administration thinks that Mark Carney's the Prime Minister of Canada, kits are enough, because 49,000 is not a lot of vehicles, but we do know that Tesla already has not factories, but retail locations in Canada. They seem to be potentially an early benefactor for that door opening. But he also said that Tesla sales year over year were down 60%. And so
Wh-
not providing autopilot is probably not going to help.
Well, it's not that clear to me when Carney talks about Chinese EVs. Do they mean Chinese EVs produced in China or Chinese branded EVs? I don't know whether that was made clear. Oh,
I think it's
the
meant to be.
uh,
The details need to be negotiated. But what David said was
it-
that if a Chinese brand is building in Europe and ships to
same as
Canada,
yeah.
that's not part of the 49th. That's what David said. He was looking at that as it should be categorized differently.
So it should be imported from China. Is that correct? Right, not
Yes.
from other parts of the
Yes.
world. So a
Right.
cherry, let's say, produced in Mexico, imported into Canada wouldn't count. Something like that.
Right. Well, and also like, if Tesla's a benefactor, they're an American brand building in China. Right. So
Yeah, so that's why I was like, I know there's a lot of talk about China, the Tesla benefiting first, but
well, that's
right, it has
because
to be the
freaking we
details.
have so many Tesla stands on our socials and it just
It has to
freaking
be,
pops up.
I have to look at the details, but yeah.
And if you think about it, there's that Stellantis Windsor factory. Okay. Could
I mean,
Leap Motor
potentially e-motor, yeah, it could be even one
right away, right? So
utilizing a dealership footprint even.
yeah, so but so
And the other part about
renegotiating USMCA becomes really, really important for the United States. And I wonder if Stella had any comments to Gretsch about, hey, let's kick the tires on Michigan, you know?
behind the scenes, who knows?
Right?
She didn't make it public, but now I was saying that, remember Cherry? So there's news about the officials from Canada last week visited Cherry, right? About them possibly setting up shop or importing the Omoda and Jaku vehicles. But remember, Cherry has gone through all of that. They're active in Mexico, one of the top leading Chinese brands. They went
UK.
through this in the early part of the pandemic. They tried to enter the US via the Vantus brand. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Through Ha Auto, HAAH, a dealership group. That kind of never went anywhere. It was based on the Exceed models. So they already have this experience, right? Working through that process.
Yeah, they're
Then,
battle
yeah,
tested.
sure.
And you know, the companies in China that are shipping in the millions should be looked at differently than the companies that are shipping in the tens and hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
So the tier one is going to be Tesla, just because they already have a network in Canada, but then BYD, Geely, Chery, Great Wall, because they ship in the millions and their apparatus is a bit more robust. Then the next tier, my guess would be Leap Motor, XPeng, because they have products I think would do well in the Western market. You know, the G6 and things like that. Even the MPV, I think, would do pretty well. And then the tier below that. And then there's this article on Car News China. I don't know if you saw it, but there's a company that exports, a Chinese company that exports Chinese EVs. And the number one export for Europe was Xiaomi.
Yeah.
So they do all the paperwork. And I don't know. So I need to find out more, because is the Xiaomi YU7 and SU7 homologated for Europe? Or how does that work to
That
get it
must be
plated?
in process, because we do know they want to launch next year into Europe, 2027. So that must be going on right now. If they're preparing,
And think
things
about
are
that,
wrong.
Lei. If it's the number one exported brand in Europe, we just talked about the premium brands kind of losing their luster. Europeans, if
Yeah.
Europeans start to buy Xiaomi as a replacement for their 3 Series, their X5, X3, oh man, dude, that is going to be trouble for ABB and Porsche. So not good.
No, I just did a CES recap, 2026. I've done that. I mean, you've done your share of recaps for auto shows. I've done mine at our good friend Bill Russo's event, the automotive committee. So I think this was like my third or fourth year. I just kind of went through what I saw, and I left at the very end. I said China versus, and I crossed versus out. And I said China cross versus out and the West, the race to advance redefined and affordable mobility was something I kind of left at the very end for people to ponder, right? Because affordability is what Carney talked about. And only the Chinese can provide affordability.
So Canada has a similar challenge to the United States, where the MSRP is going the wrong way, and it creates a tidal wave of potential demand for the Chinese brands as long as they stay under a certain price point.
And also the way we can look at it is what happened to China 40 years ago when China invited foreign automakers to set up joint ventures. I feel like is the same, but the other way around, right? For Canada to invite Chinese investment to help build the EV industry.
So I get the impression that Canada is probably kicking the tires on JV partners. So the shoe's on the other foot, where there needs to be a local JV partner for the Chinese automaker to build in Canada. So maybe that's the path for the US as well. Maybe Canada, because if you think about a company like BYD or Geely, they could the size, the the product portfolio that they have, the large product portfolio, they could build a factory in the US and in Canada and be fine. As long as the USMCA gets renegotiated
what we can
in a way
infer
that benefits both parties.
I was going to say that what we can infer, at least from Trump's comments, that the BYDs and the Geelys, they'd have to build in the US
Right.
for it to work. They can't import from Mexico or Canada to be in the US. Then it's a matter of time and where.
Well, and
Right.
that's the constraint that building in Canada creates for the Chinese automakers. Domestic market is probably, for the foreseeable future, is probably not large enough to support 150,000 unit, 250,000 unit factory unless that a good portion of that capacity is exported. So if BYD built a 250,000 unit plant in Canada, they couldn't sell 250,000 units in year 1, 2, or 3, probably.
Yeah, no, all into the longer term, I think landing in the US is the easy part. Building the brand into an Americanized feeling brand like Hyundai and Kia, that's going to take long time, if ever.
That's a good
especially with the
debate.
politicizing of China.
That's a good discussion to have. I have an idea, so I will circle back with you. But we do have one question from SPX Nomad. Good to see you again, SPX Nomad. And I'll let you start this off, Lei. How likely or well received would a BAAS model being viewed in Canada and US compared to the gas station level convenience?
I think if power swap works in Europe, especially some of the northern countries, Northern European, Scandinavia, then I don't see why it wouldn't work in anywhere in North America, right? I mean, NIO was ready to build a NIO house in San Francisco. I mean, they were actually scouting for a location, right? Remember many years ago? What comes first? Check is the next. If they come in, they obviously they have to think about making that available. But is NIO's going to be the first? I don't think so. I tend to see the other ones coming in first: Geelys, BYDs, the Cherries. But who knows?
So I will point to, my goodness, the Ample blowing up, going bankrupt as a challenge. Ample being the Silicon Valley startup that was doing battery swapping. They filed for bankruptcy. Number 2, there are a lot of things to consider when you bring battery as a service, swapping as a service, because NIO needs to sell enough vehicles, or whoever brings it needs to sell enough vehicles to where the swapping stations have utilization rates that are pretty high. The second thing, I don't know any manufacturer that has that type of capital that can continue to build swapping stations on their own without a financial partner. Okay. That's the second thing. If whoever brought EVgo, or what's the Caocao, right? CATL would likely need a financial partner in order to help them finance swapping stations. NIO, the same thing. And they have that in China, but not in the West yet that I know of. The batteries, they can't sit on NIO's balance sheet. They need to sit somewhere else. So from a financial and accounting standpoint, that needs to be settled as well. And so when you talk about BAAS, if NIO is selling tens of units or hundreds of units even, is that going to be enough to satisfy 3 or 4 swap stations in the city of San Francisco or the city of Los Angeles? Well, because there's only a handful of cities in the United States that I can think of, probably 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's say LA, San Francisco, maybe New York, Chicago, a few others that are large enough that NIO could sell enough vehicles for a swapping station or 2 swapping stations to really, really make sense. But selling into those markets is the first challenge that they need to kind of deal with.
Yeah, I think strategic location is right. Where do you put your first one? Second, third, fourth. At the same time, you probably, whoever comes in has to utilize Tesla's NACS network, right? Because virtually every automaker now can charge at Tesla's, the supercharging network. Then you must have that capability. You have to utilize the current eggs on the market, right? At the same time,
Well,
building the chicken and egg, right?
well, you had mentioned, Lei, this morning that you're going to be minus 19. We see the current crop of EVs range reducing by 30-40% because of this cold weather. This is where swapping would be great. So that's also something to think about. But again, I don't, Neo, I'm sure, has a spreadsheet that shows you within a square kilometer, we need to sell this many vehicles in order to have 1 or 2 or 3 swapping stations. And then they do a heat map. Lei, Neo owner, is in Amherst too. Neo owner is in Boston. So it makes sense to put the swapping station equidistant. And I'm making this up, but I'm sure they have those statistics and spreadsheets for China. And again, what's the minimum number of people needed in a city for even swapping to make sense, whether it's Neo, Chaco, or Geely or whatever? So, and it's very limited in Europe, in my opinion, because many cities are 200,000, 300,000.
And then also from the product side, right? If you come in, do you come in with the ES8 or ES6 type of product, or do you come in with the Firefly? If you talk about urban, if you're interested in growing, starting in the urban areas, right? There's a host of things to consider and decisions to make.
This is why they should hire us to do their strategy work in North America, Lei. Anyways, hey, so next week we will do our awards. We will give out our awards.
Some of which actually
please,
have already mentioned in this episode.
yes, those are some Easter eggs. But hey, man, stay warm, dude. I'll catch you on DMs. So everyone, thanks again for joining us. As always, stay warm for those people in the United States, and we will talk with you all next week.
Next week should
Good
be
morning.
good. Yep.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Bye-bye.